PowerShell ISE and other ISEs. In this nugget, we're going to be talking about the ISE, or Integrated Scripting Environment, that's included with Windows PowerShell version 2. We'll start with a brief overview of what the ISE is, and then look at using it as an interactive shell, and look at the value it offers as a script editor. Now, it's not the only thing out there in the world, so I'll also introduce you to and show you some other integrated scripting environments, or integrated development environments, or universal scripting environments, or whatever they're called. Some of them are commercial. There's another free one that I'll mention. But just to kind of give you an idea of what's available out there and what your options are beyond just the basic blue window with white text of the PowerShell console. This is the traditional Windows PowerShell interface, the blue box with the white text, and you can run your commands or whatever you're going to do. Now, there was a couple of problems with this shell that Microsoft ran into with version 1 that they felt they needed to fix for version 2. The first problem is that, again, you're not really looking at Windows PowerShell here. Windows PowerShell is the engine that sits behind this thing. What you're looking at here is a fairly simple console application. In fact, it's basically the same console app that command.exe uses. And it's owned by the Windows operating system team, and it has a significant limitation in that it cannot display Unicode characters, double byte character sets. In other words, people in Japan or China who rely on a double byte character set language can't really use PowerShell effectively because it's not capable of displaying all the characters for their language. Even some European languages have got extra characters that can't properly be displayed by this shell. Now, another problem that the team was trying to address when they built PowerShell version 2 is that most people were editing scripts with this little puppy, Windows Notepad. Not exactly an ideal scripting environment. Give you an example here. If you just start typing, it doesn't really help. It doesn't pre-indent your code. You have to hit tab. There's no coloring. There's no line numbering to help you kind of keep track of where you are. There's no way to run the script directly from here. And even when you save it, it always wants to tack on that txt file name extension instead of ps1. Well, in order to kind of make PowerShell version 2 a little bit more approachable and more globally usable, the team wanted to address those problems. And so in addition to providing this interface with PowerShell version 2, they're also providing what's called the ISE, or Integrated Scripting Environment. And this is its default view. In this top pane, you get a script editor. This middle pane here, you can't actually type in. This is just where your output shows up. And then this bottom pane is actually an interactive shell session. So you can just run dir, and you get all your results here. Now, you can kind of customize the layout here. I'll show you that real quick. You can click this little button here on the toolbar, and it moves your script over to the right side, and then gives you your output on the top here, and your interactive shell in the bottom. And you can click the little arrow to flip those around if you prefer. I really like this view to work in because it lets me look at my script on one screen. If I run my script, then the output will show up here in the output window, and it gives me at the same time a nice little interactive window. And the reason I like this better than the three stacks on top of one another is because I tend to need more height than width. In other words, my commands don't tend to get super long horizontally, but my output does tend to run on. So I'll often just adjust the thing this way, give myself a lot of room for output, and then I can kind of work on everything. Now, your other option, of course, is to just work full screen and do this, and you get a full screen for typing your script. And this little blue button over here will hide that and give you a full screen for your output, and you can adjust how much room you get to type in the interactive portion. The downside about this, I guess, is that if you're in here and you run a script, it automatically switches to this view so that you can see the output, and then you have to switch back. But you kind of get used to it a little bit. So let's talk about a couple of minor differences that this ISE offers over the normal, what we'll call the console window. One is if I do a command like, let's say, read host, enter a number, it shows up a command prompt. I type it, and that's what gets returned. Now, the graphical host implements that slightly differently. Read host, enter a number actually pops up with a graphical dialog box, which is, I guess if you think about it, makes sense. This is supposed to be a visual environment. So you enter the number and it works the same way. You'll notice that for a lot of the different commands. You've got the progress bar thing that you can do in the console that draws sort of a progress bar out of graphics or text characters, and in here it's actually a graphical window style progress bar. A lot of things work the same, but you get more ways to deal with them. For example, I can type CLS, and that will clear my output screen exactly as it does in the main console window. But I've got another option too. Of course, it's graphical, so if I run a command and I want to clear it, I've got this is supposed to be like a squeegee, a little window cleaner, and so it cleans the window. And of course you get buttons for cut, copy, and paste to the clipboard, to save the current script file, open a script file, create a new script file. You get your undo and redo buttons. And then if you've got a script going, you've got the buttons to run that, debug it, or stop execution. Which is the same, by the way, as clicking or pressing Control-C in the regular shell. And you've got this neat little thing here, a new Remote PowerShell tab. Now, we haven't talked about remoting yet. In fact, we're going to talk about that in nugget number 5 and nugget number 6. But once you've gotten remoting configured, what you can do is provide the computer name, and if you need to authenticate with a different username, you can type that here. It'll create a new tab within the ISE, and that tab will be connected to the PowerShell on the remote computer. So it kind of gives you a neat little way to quickly get a session up and running on a remote computer, write scripts or run commands against it and everything else, and you can have multiple tabs open. So when we talk about remoting, we'll probably pop the ISE up here and take a look at that so you can see it. But let's just start by sort of getting a little bit more accustomed to the ISE and using it as an interactive shell. And I don't really think this will take us long because it works pretty much like the regular console window. The only difference is when you type a command down here like get service, you will see some color coding. If I type a parameter like bits and a value, you can see that it's using different colors for the command name, the parameter name, and the parameter values. It does support tab completion, so if I do get-s and hit tab, it'll start running through everything that matches that till I get to the command I want. You can use tab completion for files too. So if I start typing this, hit tab, it'll go to program files, and you'll notice that it's color coding that, and it's automatically putting the quotes around it because that particular directory name has a space and all that stuff. I guess the big difference between this and the regular console host is that when I hit enter, my command doesn't stay here. Instead, you can see here the prompt, and this is what I ran, and basically this output window is basically the same as I would see in the console window. You can see the command that I ran, you can see its output. The difference there is that it puts this horizontal line in to separate. So if I run something again, I can kind of scroll up and see, okay, this up to the line was the first command I ran, and then from the line down to the next line was the second command I ran, and so on. So this is pretty much the same as using the regular console. Now, with the regular console window, of course, you can open up multiple windows. That's really useful if you've got multiple monitors and a lot more desktop real estate than I have right here. You can have one where maybe you're looking at help and the other where you're running commands. Or this is kind of similar in that you can open a new local tab with Control-T, same keyboard shortcut that you would use in a web browser, for example. And so now I've got two different shells, and these are independent. Let's see exactly how independent they are, in fact. Let's run CLS. Let's set variable equal to 5. And over in this tab, let's just look at the contents of variable. And var is empty. So these are really the same thing as two completely separate console windows. Each of these tabs is a completely independent instance of the shell. So I can experiment in one and move over to the other to do something for real, or vice versa, or maybe have different tasks running in the two of them. I can even have different snap-ins loaded. For example, this first one might be a shell where I have my Active Directory commandlets loaded, and the second tab might be one where I have some Exchange server commandlets loaded, or something like that. So you can kind of configure this and work it however you want to, and as you imagine, you can stack up as many of these tabs as you want to, and really play with it however you want to. Now, a couple of caveats. If you're using Windows 7, this ISE is pre-installed, along with the normal console window. I, however, am using Windows Server 2008 R2. And when you install that for the first time and go to the Start menu here, under Accessories, normally all you'll see is the two icons for Windows PowerShell x86 and Windows PowerShell. which is the 64-bit version. These two ISE icons aren't there by default. To get those, you need to go into Server Manager. So let's pull up Server Manager here, and you'll find this under Features. So if I scroll down a bit, you'll see Feature Summary. I have explicitly installed the Windows PowerShell integrated scripting environment. So if you want to add or remove features, if you want this on your server for some reason, you would need to locate that. And here it is, Windows PowerShell integrated scripting environment. And when you go to install that, it actually turns on several other features. In fact, this .NET Framework 3.51 is a requirement. Normally, Windows PowerShell will run on as old as version 2 of the .NET Framework. If you want to use the ISE, you have to have 3.51 of the .NET Framework. So just a little good to know. Cancel out of the Server Manager here. And you know, honestly, I think one of the reasons that the PowerShell team only installed the regular PowerShell on the server product by default is that they really don't expect you to be sitting down at a server console writing scripts. I mean, any more than you would sit down at a server console and use Microsoft Word. And so what they did is they installed the version of PowerShell that you would, this one, that you just get on the command line, primarily because this is what you would be using remotely as well. Just by having the core PowerShell engine on the server enables the PowerShell remoting that we're going to talk about in nuggets number 5 and 6. So they got that installed by default, and they leave it up to you to decide if you think you need the graphical integrated scripting environment or not. And you know, honestly, on most production servers, you probably don't need to install that. Again, on the client operating system on Windows 7, or if you install Windows PowerShell version 2 on XP or Server 2003 or Vista or Server 2008 RTM, you're going to have the choice of whether or not you want to install the console and the ISE or not. And on the client operating system, it certainly makes sense to do so because that's where you're going to be writing scripts. And in fact, why don't we talk about using the ISE as a script editing environment? Now, people like to go on about a few features that they like to have in, I won't say a scripting environment, but in a program coding environment. It could be Visual Studio, it could be a simple ISE like this. And one of the features that they like to talk about is syntax highlighting, or I just like to call it color coding, so that if I type things, keywords show up in different colors depending on what they are. So I can type the keyword function. I'll provide a name for my function. I can provide some other keywords in here. And you'll notice too that as I'm typing, it's maintaining the indentation level. So that if I do something like if the current pipeline object name property equals bits, and inside this construct I'm going to want to indent to help me keep track of what code is inside the construct. And as I hit enter, it's going to maintain that indentation. You can also use the tab key to change the indentation, and you can even do that for an entire block of code if you realize that, oh wow, I want to insert some more and that should have been in here. So I'm just hitting tab and shift tab. And this just helps kind of keep your code neat. And again, the color coding is designed to make the script a little bit easier to read, sure, but here's why I like the color coding. Once you get used to this, I'm used to commandlet names being in this sort of medium blue shade. So if I do something like this, and I'm typing, and it doesn't turn the correct color, then I know, oh, I didn't type that as a commandlet name. Or it can also be useful for quotation marks. Look here. When I don't properly close the quotation marks, it doesn't turn to that reddish brown color. Because I've got a double quote and a single quote, my quotes aren't right. So this would actually help prevent a syntax error for me. When it doesn't change colors, I'd look back and go, wait a minute. Oh, right, double quotation marks. And now it turned to the right color, and it just kind of helps you, prevent you from making the basic typos. Now, the ISE is not intended to be a replacement for anything big like Visual Studio. It's really bare bones. You can kind of think of it as color-coded Notepad. It does have line numbers, which is really cool. It lets you copy and paste, and you get right clicks and everything else. However, it does not do things like code completion. If I start typing a commandlet name, I don't get a drop-down menu of things that match what I've typed so far. I can still hit tab to complete it, but it's not a drop-down list. And that's something that you might expect to get in a more full-featured integrated development environment that's not provided here. This does provide debugging support. And debugging is something we're going to talk about a little bit later, nugget number 8 to be precise, but this will allow me to say, okay, on this line I want to toggle a breakpoint. And I guess I would have to do that on a line that actually is a command. Let's put one in. So I could toggle a breakpoint there and say this is where I want execution to stop when I'm doing my debugging. And that's part of what this debugging menu is all about as well. And we'll get to that when we talk about debugging. But that's all something that's, again, supported within this ISE. So it's a decent, bare bones scripting environment. In fact, let's just write a very short script. And again, remember, a script in PowerShell is not anything special. It's really just the same commands you would run at the command line, only instead of typing them manually, you're saving them in a file. I don't even like to call them scripts. I like to call them batch files. So let's just write something simple. And we'll set that equal to a variable so we can save the results. Okay, so we've got the whole script here. I can choose to save it. In fact, let's go ahead and do that. We'll leave this in my documents here. We'll call it age check. It'll automatically add a PS1 if I want it to, but let's just put a PS1 on the end. And to run this, simply hit the little run button. And it failed because execution of the script is disabled on this system. And this is something we're going to talk about in the next nugget actually. And if you've used PowerShell version 1, then you're familiar with the execution policy. And I did this to point out that the ISE does not bypass the execution policy in any way. Under the default execution policy, which is restricted, you can only use PowerShell interactively, and that's either from the console or from the ISE. In fact, if I go into the regular shell here, change to my documents folder, there's that age check, so let's just try and run agecheck.ps1, and it says it cannot be loaded because the execution of scripts is disabled in this system. Exact same scenario. So to change that, we're going to change the execution policy to remote signed. This is kind of a neat little thing here. It's a pop-up because it's a query. In the regular console, it would have just been a push Y, N, or S to suspend. Again, the ISE likes to make things a little bit more graphical, so we're going to say sure, go ahead. And now let's switch back to our script and see if we can run it. Enter your age, and it gives us the appropriate response. Now, let's come down here into this shell and do a get execution policy, and it's remote signed. So the point there is that the execution policy is global across the entire machine. It's not configured on a per shell basis. So if it's changed in one place, it's going to be changed globally across the entire machine. So now I can actually hit up arrow a couple times, hit enter, and it'll run. And you can see that it just runs slightly differently. Rather than with that little pop-up dialog box for the read host, it's just going to collect that information right from the command line. So this is a pretty good scripting environment. It's bare bones. It's a bare minimum. It's better than Notepad. In fact, don't let me catch you running PowerShell scripts or typing PowerShell scripts in Notepad. Even if you've got no money to spend, this is free and way better than Notepad. So at least get yourself using this thing. Now that's not to say you can't do better. In fact, let me just type out some comments here in the script so I can give you some URLs. One is powergui.org. With a W. This is another free thing. This is from Quest Software. It's a free integrated scripting environment, and it's also sort of a wrapper, a graphical wrapper that sits on top of PowerShell. So someone less experienced can use PowerShell to accomplish specific tasks without actually having to type all the commands and everything. That one's free. Another one is called PowerShell Plus. You'll find that at PowerShellPlus.com. This is made by a company called Idera. It's a commercial product, but it's a much more full-featured scripting environment. And another one is PrimalScript.com. This is made by Sapien and is another more full-featured scripting environment. In fact, let me close the ISE here. And I happen to have PrimalScript installed, so I'm going to launch that just for comparison purposes, so you can kind of see what some of the differences are. This will take just a minute to get up and running here. And let's close this start page and open a new PowerShell script. You can see that obviously one of the differences is that this supports 11 dozen different scripting languages. PowerShell is one of them, so we get a nice little PowerShell template here. And I can kind of, just do the same thing I did before, but you'll notice that this is actually going to help me type faster by giving me code completion, and that's something you can expect from a higher-end integrated development environment. And this is also giving me this neat little tooltip here that's kind of showing me what the syntax is as I go. So I can just start typing. And it's still doing the color coding and the line numbering and all that fun stuff. So we'll do a little bit shorter of a script here. Oops, I guess we should save this into a variable. And this is also doing live syntax checking. Notice that little red underline. It's upset because I've got this open construct here. And once I close that, notice it highlighted the two curly braces. And that's kind of a way for me to visually verify that I've closed. It helps me match those. If you start getting really deeply nested constructs, it can be useful to, if you kind of lose track of where you are in the nesting and you're not sure if you've properly indented and closed everything, that those matches can really help you figure that out. So you just have to put your cursor at the end of one and it'll show you it's matching. So we'll just change this to, say, right host, and we'll have an else. And you can see that when I hover over that red line, it's showing me a tooltip. I'm missing the closing curly brace. So as soon as I put the curly brace in, that goes away. So I can save this just as I did before. This goes into a different folder by default, so we'll just save AgeCheckPS1 there. And when I'm ready to execute it, there's toolbar buttons and everything else, but I'll just grab it from the menu, Run Script. And I do have to make sure I load any required snap-ins. I'm going to say, don't show me that again. And then its output comes up in a separate pane, and it gets a little pop-up just like it did in the ISE, and gives me my output there. So kind of a similar idea, just with a little bit more sophistication. And of course you get lots of extra things. Let's go to this snippets browser. This is one of the things I really like. There's a bunch of PowerShell snippets. If you want to write to a log file or send an email, well, all I have to do is drag this in here and it'll automatically drag that code. So it's really kind of a more grown-up version. You can kind of think of this as a Visual Studio style experience, only designed specifically for PowerShell. And again, I mentioned three of them: PowerGUI.org, PowerShellPlus.com, and this one is PrimalScript.com. My advice is to go download all of them. The two commercial ones, PowerShell Plus and PrimalScript, both offer a free trial period, so you can decide which one suits you best. If you need to script in other languages like, I don't know, VBScript or batch files or Perl or something, that might drive you toward PrimalScript, which supports those languages. You might find something in PowerShell Plus that you fall in love with, or you might download PowerGUI and really enjoy the non-command experience of using PowerShell. So try them all. I would really recommend that if you're going to be serious about using PowerShell, especially with scripting and building complex batches, I think you're going to find that the commercial tools really do provide a lot of value in helping you avoid bugs, helping you work a little bit more quickly, showing you syntax as you go so that you don't have to constantly refer back to a help file or to a reference book. I really do think that they're worth their while, and I certainly use one in all the work I do. Which one you use is really a matter of personal preference. In this nugget, we've talked about the integrated scripting environment that comes with Windows PowerShell version 2. We did a quick overview and looked at using it as an interactive shell. I also pointed out that this is not installed by default on server operating systems, but it is something you can install, and you would really only install it in places, I think, where you're going to be using the shell constantly, and especially where you're going to be scripting, because we did look at using it as a script editor and script execution environment. But the ISE isn't the only thing out there, and depending on your needs, you may need something that's a little bit more sophisticated and a little bit more feature-rich. So we looked at some other options. Those included PowerGUI, PowerShell Plus, and Primal Script. And because I happen to have Primal Script installed here, I showed you what that looks like, just to give you an idea of what sort of additional features you can expect from any of these. Things like not only syntax highlighting, but also code hinting and code completion, things like code snippets to let you work a little bit more quickly, things like that. So you should download all of them. Try them all. The commercial ones are available with a free trial, so you've got a chance to use it and see how it works. And definitely get the one that you think is going to best suit your needs. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.